She grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone, the kind of place where news traveled faster than the wind, and people had opinions about things that were none of their business. It was a quiet life, simple in many ways, but for her, it often felt like living inside a box that someone else had built. From a very young age, she understood something that most kids her age didn't have to think about. She understood that the world looked at her differently, not because of anything she had done, but simply because of how she looked. She wasn't the girl that people noticed when she walked into a room. She wasn't the one boys talked about or girls wanted to be friends with just to be seen with her. She was just there, present but invisible, like furniture that everyone walked past without a second glance. School was the hardest part. Kids can be cruel without even trying, and sometimes the silence hurts more than the words. She would sit in the back of the classroom, not because she wanted to hide, but because it felt safer there. Teachers rarely called on her. Group projects meant she was always the last one picked. During lunch, she ate alone more times than she could count, pretending to read a book so it looked like she had chosen solitude rather than having it forced upon her. But there was one thing that made her feel alive. One thing that made her forget, even if just for a few minutes, that the world didn't seem to have a place for her. Music. She couldn't remember when it started exactly. Maybe it was the old radio her grandmother used to keep in the kitchen, always playing songs from another time. Maybe it was the way her mother hummed while doing dishes, filling the house with melodies that felt like warmth. Whatever it was, music found its way into her heart and never left. She would sing in her room when no one was home. She would hum under her breath while walking to school. She would close her eyes during quiet moments and hear entire songs playing in her head, note by note, word by word. Her voice was her secret, a hidden treasure that she protected because she was terrified of what would happen if she shared it and the world rejected that too. Her grandmother was the only one who truly knew. The old woman had a way of seeing things that others missed. She would often call her into the kitchen, hand her a cup of warm tea, and say, "Sing something for me, child." And she would. In that small kitchen with the cracked tiles and the smell of spices in the air, she would sing like no one was listening. And her grandmother would close her eyes, smile, and whisper, "You have a gift. Don't ever let anyone make you forget that." But her grandmother passed away when she was 14. It happened quietly, the way gentle souls often leave this world. One evening she was there, laughing and telling old stories. The next morning she was gone, and with her went the only person who had ever made her feel like her voice mattered. After that she stopped singing out loud. The music stayed inside her, but she locked it away like something too precious to risk losing again. Years passed. She finished school, got a small job at a local shop, and lived a life that felt more like existing than truly living. She smiled when she had to, spoke when spoken to, and kept her head down. It was easier that way, safer. Then one afternoon, everything changed. She was walking home from work when she saw it. A bright yellow flyer taped to a lamppost, flapping slightly in the breeze. It announced a talent competition at the town's community hall, open to everyone, all ages, all backgrounds. The winner would get a small cash prize, but more than that, they would perform at the annual town festival in front of hundreds of people. She stopped walking and just stared at it. Her heart began to beat faster. A strange feeling rose in her chest. It was the same feeling she used to get when her grandmother asked her to sing. A mix of fear and excitement that made her hands tremble. She told herself to keep walking. This wasn't for her. People like her didn't do things like this. She would go up there and they would laugh. They would whisper. They would confirm every terrible thing she had ever believed about herself. But her feet wouldn't move. She stood there for what felt like forever, reading the same words over and over again. And somewhere deep inside her, a small voice spoke. It sounded a lot like her grandmother. "What are you so afraid of?" Before she could talk herself out of it, she pulled the flyer off the post and folded it into her pocket. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the flyer sitting on her nightstand like a challenge. She thought about all the reasons why this was a terrible idea. She had no training. She had never performed in front of anyone except her grandmother. She didn't have the right look, the right clothes, the right confidence. People would see her and immediately write her off. But then she thought about her life. The same routine, day after day. The same emptiness that followed her like a shadow. The same feeling of being invisible in a world full of people. Was this really how she wanted to spend the rest of her years? Always wondering what could have been if she had just been brave enough to try. The next morning, she walked to the community hall before she could change her mind. The woman at the registration desk barely looked up when she entered. She slid a form across the counter and said, "Fill this out. Auditions are next week." Her hand shook as she wrote her name. When she handed the form back, the woman finally looked at her. There was a pause, a quick glance up and down, and then nothing. No smile, no encouragement, no acknowledgement, just a nod and a next. She walked out of that building feeling like she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. At home, she made the mistake of telling her family. She thought maybe, just maybe, they would support her. Instead, she got worried looks and careful words. "Are you sure this is a good idea? You know how people in this town can be. We just don't want you to get hurt." They meant well, she knew that, but their concern felt like another vote of no confidence, another reminder that even the people who loved her didn't believe she could do this. The days that followed were some of the hardest she had ever faced. Doubt followed her everywhere. It whispered to her while she worked. It sat with her while she ate. It crept into her dreams and turned them into nightmares where she stood on stage and no sound came out of her mouth while everyone laughed. She practiced in secret, locking her bedroom door and singing into a hairbrush like she used to do as a child. Her voice felt rusty at first, like an old instrument that hadn't been played in years. But slowly it came back. The notes found their way out. The melodies returned. And with them came something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. It was small and fragile like a candle flame in the wind, but it was there, and for now that was enough. She didn't know what would happen when she stepped on that stage. She didn't know if she would freeze or fail or prove everyone right, but she knew one thing for certain. She had spent her whole life being invisible, and for once, just once, she wanted to be seen. The week before the competition felt like the longest week of her life. Every morning she woke up with a knot in her stomach that refused to go away. Every night she went to bed with her mind racing, replaying every possible outcome until exhaustion finally pulled her into restless sleep. She tried to keep her normal routine. She went to work at the shop, smiled at customers, stacked shelves, and counted change. But her mind was never fully there. It was always somewhere else, on that stage, under those lights, standing in front of people who would be watching her, judging her, waiting for her to fail. The news spread quickly, as news always does in small towns. She never told anyone besides her family, but somehow people found out. Maybe someone saw her name on the registration list. Maybe the woman at the desk mentioned it to a friend. It didn't matter how it happened. What mattered was that suddenly, everyone seemed to know. She first noticed it at the grocery store. She was picking out vegetables when she heard two women talking in the next aisle. Their voices were low but not low enough. "Did you hear? She signed up for the talent show." "Her, really? What's she going to do?" "Sing, apparently." There was a pause, then a small laugh, not loud or mean, just surprised, like the idea was somehow amusing. "Well, that should be interesting." She stood frozen, holding a tomato in her hand, feeling her face grow hot. She put the tomato back, left her basket in the aisle, and walked out of the store without buying anything. That night she cried for the first time in years. Not dramatic sobs, just quiet tears that rolled down her cheeks while she sat on the edge of her bed. She felt so foolish. What had she been thinking? She wasn't a performer. She wasn't brave or talented or special. She was just a girl who liked to sing in her room, and she had somehow convinced herself that was enough. She pulled out the yellow flyer from her drawer and stared at it. Her fingers traced the edges, worn soft from all the time she had held it. Part of her wanted to tear it up and throw it away. Pretend this had never happened. Go back to her quiet life where no one expected anything from her and she couldn't disappoint anyone. But another part of her, a stubborn little voice that refused to stay silent, asked a different question. If you quit now, will you ever forgive yourself? She didn't have an answer, so she put the flyer back in the drawer and went asleep. The next few days were harder. The whispers followed her everywhere. At work, she caught her exchanging glances when they thought she wasn't looking. At the bus stop, a group of teenagers pointed at her and snickered. Even at home, her family walked on eggshells around her, careful not to bring up the competition, which somehow made it worse. She started to doubt everything: her voice, her decision, her worth. She would practice at night, but the songs that used to bring her comfort now filled her with anxiety. Every note felt wrong. Every lyric felt empty. She would stop mid-song, convinced that she sounded terrible, and sit in silence wondering why she had ever thought she could do this. One evening, she overheard her brother talking on the phone in the next room. He didn't know she was listening. "Yeah, she's really going through with it. I don't know, man. I just hope she doesn't embarrass herself up there. You know how people talk in this town. She's already got it hard enough." He wasn't being cruel. She knew that. He was worried about her, but his words cut deep because they confirmed what she had feared all along. Even the people who loved her didn't believe she could succeed. They were just waiting to pick up the pieces after she fell. That was the first time she almost quit. She got dressed, put on her shoes, and walked all the way to the community hall. It was late afternoon and the building was quiet. She stood outside the front doors for a long time, her hand hovering over the handle. All she had to do was go inside, find someone, and say she had changed her mind. It would be over. The whispers would stop. The pressure would disappear. She could go back to being invisible, and no one would ever have to know how scared she had been. But as she stood there, something unexpected happened. A memory surfaced, clear and vivid, like it had been waiting for this exact moment. She was 12 years old, sitting in her grandmother's kitchen. It was raining outside, and the sound of water hitting the roof made the whole house feel cozy and safe. Her grandmother was making soup, stirring the pot slowly while humming an old song. "Grandma," she had asked, "do you ever get scared?" The old woman had smiled and wiped her hands on her apron. "Of course I do, child. Everyone gets scared." "Then how do you do things anyway? How do you not let it stop you?" Her grandmother had walked over and sat down beside her. She took her hands and held them gently. "Fear is just a feeling," she said. "It's not the truth. It tells you all the bad things that might happen, but it never tells you about the good things. It never tells you about the magic that's waiting on the other side of brave." She had never forgotten those words, but somewhere along the way she had stopped believing them. Standing outside that community hall, with the sun setting behind her and her heart pounding in her chest, she heard her grandmother's voice as clearly as if she were standing right beside her. "The magic is waiting, child, but you have to be brave enough to find it." She let go of the door handle, turned around, and walked home. She wasn't going to quit, not today. The final days before the competition passed in a blur. She practiced harder than ever, pushing through the doubt, singing even when her voice cracked and her confidence wavered. She chose a song that meant something to her, an old ballad that her grandmother used to love. It was simple and honest, the kind of song that didn't need fancy tricks or powerful belts. It just needed truth. She practiced it until she knew every word by heart, until the melody lived in her bones, until she could sing it with her eyes closed and feel something real moving through her. The night before the competition, she couldn't eat. Her stomach was in knots and her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She sat on her bed, staring at the wall, thinking about everything that could go wrong. What if she forgot the words? What if her voice gave out? What if everyone laughed? What if she walked out there and proved every doubter right. The questions spun in her head like a storm she couldn't escape. She almost reached for her phone to call the organizers and back out. Her finger hovered over the number. One tap, and it would all be over. But then she looked at the small photo on her nightstand. Her grandmother, smiling at the camera, eyes full of warmth and wisdom. She had taken that photo years ago, and it had stayed with her through every move, every hard season, every lonely night. She picked up the frame and held it close. "I'm so scared, Grandma," she whispered. "I don't know if I can do this." The room was silent. No magical voice answered her. No sign appeared to tell her everything would be okay. But somehow in that silence she found something she hadn't expected. Acceptance. She was scared, that was the truth, but she was also tired, tired of hiding, tired of shrinking, tired of letting fear make every decision for her. Tomorrow she would walk onto that stage. She didn't know what would happen. She didn't know if she would succeed or fail, but she knew one thing for certain. She would rather fail trying than spend the rest of her life wondering what might have been. She put the photo back on her nightstand, lay down, and closed her eyes. Tomorrow would come whether she was ready or not. And for the first time in a long time, she decided to meet it standing up. The morning arrived whether she was ready or not. She opened her eyes to pale sunlight creeping through the curtains and lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling. Her first thought was simple and heavy. Today is the day. She got out of bed slowly, like her body was trying to delay what her mind had already accepted. The competition started at 6 in the evening, which meant she had an entire day to sit with her nerves, an entire day to think about everything that could go wrong, an entire day to talk herself out of showing up. She went through her morning routine on autopilot, brushed her teeth, washed her face, made a cup of tea that she barely touched. Her mother was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a worried look that she was trying to hide behind a smile. "How are you feeling?" her mother asked. She shrugged, nervous. Her mother nodded and reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "You don't have to do this, you know. No one would blame you if you changed your mind." It was meant to be comforting, but it landed like a punch. Even now, on the day itself, her own mother was giving her a way out. Not because she was cruel, but because she didn't believe her daughter could handle what was coming. The doubt was everywhere. It had seeped into every corner of her life, and now it sat at her own kitchen table, wearing her mother's face. She pulled her hand back gently and forced a small smile. "I know, but I want to do this." Her mother didn't argue. She just nodded again and went back to her coffee, the worry still visible in her eyes. The hours crawled by. She tried to distract herself with television, but nothing held her attention. She tried to read, but the words blurred together on the page. She tried to take a nap, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw the stage, the lights, the faces in the crowd. By mid-afternoon, she couldn't take it anymore. She went to her room and started getting ready, even though she had hours to spare. At least it gave her something to do. She didn't have fancy clothes or expensive makeup. She wore a simple dress that she had bought years ago for a cousin's wedding. It was nothing special, just dark blue fabric that fell to her knees, but it was the nicest thing she owned. She brushed her hair and looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. The girl staring back at her looked small, uncertain, like someone who had wandered into the wrong story by mistake. "You can do this," she whispered to her reflection. The words sounded hollow, but she said them anyway. Sometimes you have to speak things into existence before you can believe them. Her brother offered to drive her to the community hall. The ride was quiet. He kept glancing at her like he wanted to say something, but the words never came. When they pulled up outside the building, he finally spoke. "Hey, whatever happens in there, I'm proud of you for trying. Most people never even get that far." She looked at him, surprised. It was the first genuinely supportive thing anyone in her family had said since this whole thing started. Her eyes stung, but she blinked the tears back and nodded. "Thanks," she said. "That means a lot." She got out of the car and walked toward the entrance. The community hall looked different at night, bigger somehow, more intimidating. There were people everywhere, families arriving with excited children, groups of friends laughing and taking photos, performers carrying instrument cases and garment bags. She had never felt more alone. Inside, the backstage area was chaos. There were about 15 performers in total, and most of them looked like they had done this 100 times before. A young man in a sharp suit was warming up his voice in the corner, running through scales like it was the easiest thing in the world. A girl around her age was stretching in front of a mirror, preparing for what looked like a dance routine. A band was tuning their instruments, joking with each other, completely relaxed. And then there was her, standing by the wall with her arms crossed over her chest, trying to make herself as small as possible. No one talked to her. No one even looked at her. She was invisible again, just like always. A woman with a clipboard walked through the room, calling out names and assigning performance slots. When she reached her, she glanced down at the list and said, "You're number 12. Be ready when they call you." Number 12. That meant she would have to sit through 11 other performances before her turn came. 11 chances to watch people who were better than her. 11 opportunities for her confidence to crumble completely. She found a chair in the corner and sat down. Her hands were trembling, so she clasped them together in her lap. Her heart was beating so fast she could feel it in her throat. She tried to take deep breaths, but they came out shallow and shaky. One by one, the performers were called to the stage. She could hear the music through the walls, muffled but still clear enough to know that these people were good. Really good. The audience cheered after each act, and every round of applause made her stomach sink a little lower. What was she doing here? She didn't belong with these people. She was a nobody from a small town who sang in her bedroom. They were real performers with real talent and real confidence. She was just pretending. A girl sitting nearby glanced over at her and smiled. First time. She nodded, not trusting her voice. The girl laughed kindly. "You look terrified. Don't worry, everyone feels that way their first time. Once you get out there, the adrenaline takes over. You'll be fine." She wanted to believe that. She really did. But the fear had its claws in deep, and no amount of kind words could shake it loose. The acts continued, 10, 11, and then she heard it. "Number 12, you're up." Her legs didn't want to move. For a moment, she just sat there, frozen, as if staying still could somehow stop time and save her from what was coming. But the woman with the clipboard was looking at her impatiently, and someone was holding the backstage door open, waiting. She stood up. Her knees felt weak, like they might give out at any second. She walked toward the door, each step heavier than the last. The hallway to the stage seemed to stretch forever, a long tunnel with bright light at the end. And then she was there, standing in the wings, looking out at the stage where a microphone stood waiting for her under a single spotlight. The host's voice echoed through the hall. "Please welcome our next performer to the stage." Polite applause, nothing enthusiastic, just the kind of clapping people do when they're being courteous but don't expect much. She stepped out. The lights hit her immediately, bright and blinding. She couldn't see the audience clearly, just dark shapes in rows of seats. But she could feel them. Hundreds of eyes turning toward her, sizing her up, forming judgments before she had even opened her mouth. She walked to the microphone. Her shoes made soft sounds on the wooden stage. The distance felt impossibly long, like walking through water. When she finally reached the center, she stopped and faced the crowd. Silence. Somewhere in the front row, she heard a whisper, a small rustle of movement as someone leaned over to say something to their neighbor. A few people checked their phones, the screens glowing in the darkness. They weren't being rude on purpose. They just didn't expect anything worth watching. She wrapped her fingers around the microphone stand to steady herself. The metal was cold against her skin. Her mouth felt dry. Her mind felt blank. The song she had practiced 100 times suddenly seemed like a distant memory, the words scrambled and out of reach. The backing track started. A soft piano intro, gentle and slow. Her cue was coming. In a few seconds she would need to sing. But nothing came. Her lips parted but no sound escaped. The first line passed. Then the second. The music played on without her and she just stood there, paralyzed, trapped inside her own fear. The audience shifted. She could feel their discomfort, their second-hand embarrassment. Someone coughed. Someone else sighed. This was it. This was the moment everyone had predicted. She had walked onto this stage with doubt surrounding her like a cloud, and now that doubt was proving itself right. She was going to fail, in front of everyone, just like they all expected. The piano continued its gentle melody, waiting for her voice. And she had nothing to give. The silence stretched like a rubber band pulled too tight, ready to snap at any moment. She stood frozen at the microphone, the piano track playing softly behind her, each passing second feeling like an hour. The audience watched, waited, some with pity, some with impatience, some already reaching for their phones, ready to move on to the next distraction. She could feel the heat of the spotlight pressing down on her. Sweat formed on her palms. Her throat had closed up completely, like someone had wrapped invisible hands around it and squeezed. This was her nightmare coming true in real time, and there was nowhere to hide. A voice in her head screamed at her to run, to turn around, walk off the stage, and disappear into the night. No one would stop her. No one would blame her. They would just shake their heads and say they saw it coming. Another dreamer who reached too far and fell. But her feet wouldn't move. Not forward, not backward. She was stuck, trapped between the fear of failing and the fear of giving up. The piano intro was looping now. The sound technician must have realized something was wrong and set it to repeat, giving her another chance. One more opportunity to find her voice before it was too late. She closed her eyes. The lights disappeared. The audience disappeared. The stage, the microphone, the whole world faded away until there was nothing left but darkness and the sound of her own breathing. And in that darkness, she found herself somewhere else entirely. She was back in her grandmother's kitchen. The old wooden table with the coffee stains that never quite came out. The window above the sink where sunlight streamed in every afternoon. The smell of bread baking in the oven and tea steeping on the counter. Her grandmother was there, not as a ghost or a vision, but as a memory so vivid it felt real. She was sitting in her usual chair, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes soft and knowing. "Why are you so afraid, child?" her grandmother asked. "Because they don't believe in me," she answered in her mind. "Because I don't know if I believe in myself." Her grandmother smiled. That same gentle smile that had comforted her through every hard moment of her childhood. "You're not singing for them," her grandmother said. "You never were. You're singing because music lives inside you, because it's part of who you are. The moment you try to sing for their approval, you lose. But if you sing for yourself, if you sing from that place deep down where truth lives, no one can take that away from you." "But what if I'm not good enough?" "Good enough for what? For strangers to clap, for people to remember your name." Her grandmother shook her head slowly. "The only thing that matters is whether you're brave enough to share what's inside you. The rest is just noise." She felt something shift inside her chest. A knot that had been tied for years began to loosen, thread by thread. "I'm scared, Grandma." "I know, child. Courage isn't about not being scared. It's about being scared and singing anyway." She opened her eyes. The stage was still there. The audience was still waiting. The piano was still playing its gentle loop. Nothing had changed, but everything felt different. The fear was still present, but it no longer had control. It was just a feeling now, just a wave she could choose to ride instead of drown in. She took a breath, deep and slow, let it fill her lungs completely. And then she let it out, releasing everything she had been holding onto. The doubt, the shame, the years of feeling invisible, she let it all go in one long exhale. And then she began to sing. The first note was soft, almost a whisper. It cracked slightly at the edges, fragile and uncertain, but it was there. It existed. She had made a sound and the world hadn't ended. The second note was stronger, and the third stronger still. With each word she felt herself coming back to life, like a flower opening after a long winter. The song was the one she had chosen weeks ago, the old ballad her grandmother used to love. She knew every word by heart, and now those words flowed out of her like water finding its natural path. Something changed in the room. She couldn't see it with her eyes closed, but she could feel it. The restless energy of the audience began to settle. The whispers stopped. The phones went down. People who had been ready to dismiss her were now leaning forward in their seats, caught off guard by what they were hearing. Her voice filled the space, not loud or powerful in the way trained singers sounded, but real, raw, honest in a way that couldn't be faked or learned. She sang about loss and love and holding on to hope when everything felt hopeless. She sang about being small in a big world and still believing you mattered. She sang about her grandmother, though no one in the audience knew that. They didn't need to know. They could feel it. By the time she reached the chorus, her voice had found its full strength. The notes soared out of her, rich and clear, carrying years of hidden emotion. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The music had taken over and she was just along for the ride. In the third row, a woman pressed her hand to her chest, her own eyes glistening. A few seats away, an older man who had looked bored earlier was now watching with his mouth slightly open, completely still. Near the back, a teenage girl had stopped texting and was staring at the stage like she was seeing something she would never forget. The song built toward its final verse. She poured everything she had into those last lines. Every lonely night, every cruel whisper, every moment she had felt invisible and worthless, but also every dream she had held onto in secret, every hope she had been too afraid to speak out loud. It all came through in her voice, transformed into something beautiful. She held the final note longer than she had ever held it in practice. It hung in the air like a prayer, suspended between the stage and the ceiling, between her heart and every heart in the room. And when she finally let it go, when the last echo faded into silence, she stood there with her eyes still closed, trembling slightly, completely emptied out. For a moment there was nothing, absolute silence, the kind that could mean anything. Then someone started clapping. It was just one person at first, a single pair of hands somewhere in the middle of the audience, but then another joined, and another. Within seconds the entire room erupted in applause, not polite, courteous clapping, real applause, the kind that comes from people who have just witnessed something unexpected and extraordinary. She opened her eyes. People were standing, not everyone but enough. A standing ovation from strangers who had walked in expecting nothing from her. The woman in the third row was openly crying and clapping at the same time. The bored man was on his feet, shaking his head in disbelief. Even the teenagers in the back were cheering. She didn't know what to do. She had imagined this moment in her dreams, but she had never truly believed it could happen. Her legs felt weak, and she gripped the microphone stand to keep from falling. The host walked back onto the stage, still clapping, a wide smile on his face. He put a hand on her shoulder and leaned into the microphone. "Ladies and, I don't think any of us were expecting that." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Warm, kind laughter nodded her with her. She managed a small, shaky smile. The tears were still wet on her cheeks, and she felt exposed in a way she had never experienced before. But beneath the vulnerability, there was something else. Pride. She had done it. Against every odd, against every doubt, against every voice that had ever told her she wasn't enough. She had walked onto this stage as a nobody, and for 4 minutes she had made an entire room full of strangers feel something real. As she walked off the stage, her legs barely holding her up, One thought echoed through her mind. Grandma, I did it. I finally did it. And somewhere she was certain, her grandmother was smiling. She made it backstage before her legs finally gave out. She found a chair in the corner and collapsed into it, her whole body shaking. The adrenaline that had carried her through the performance was fading now, leaving her feeling hollow and light, like she might float away at any moment. Other performers glanced at her as they passed. Some smiled. A few nodded with respect. The girl who had spoken to her earlier, the one who asked if it was her first time, walked over and squeezed her shoulder. I told you the adrenaline would take over, she said with a grin. That was incredible, seriously. She managed a weak smile in return, but words wouldn't come. She was still processing what had just happened. The applause, the standing ovation, the look on people's faces as she walked off stage. It didn't feel real. None of it felt real. The rest of the competition passed in a blur. She watched the remaining performers from the wings, but she barely registered their acts. Her mind kept replaying her own performance, moment by moment. The silence before she sang. The first shaky note. The way the music had taken over and carried her somewhere she had never been before. When all the acts were finished, the judges gathered to make their decision. The performers were called back onto the stage to wait for the results. She stood at the end of the line, still trembling slightly, her heart beating fast again. The host took the microphone and began announcing the winners in reverse order. Third place went to the young man in the sharp suit who had been warming up his voice so confidently. Second place went to the girl with the dance routine. Both of them accepted their small trophies with gracious smiles and polite applause. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. And our first place winner, who will be performing at this year's town festival, is. She held her breath. The whole room seemed to hold its breath with her. Our incredible band, for their original song that brought the house down. Cheers erupted as the band members rushed forward to accept their trophy. She exhaled slowly, a strange mix of emotions washing over her. Disappointment, yes. A small sting of rejection that she couldn't completely ignore, but underneath that something else. Something that surprised her. Relief. She hadn't won, but she also hadn't failed. She had done what she came to do. She had faced her fear, stepped into the spotlight, and shared her voice with the world. For years, she had dreamed about this moment while being too scared to chase it. Now it was behind her, and no trophy or title could change what she had gained. She had gained belief. In herself, in the music that lived inside her, in the truth that she was worth hearing, whether the judges recognized it or not. As she walked off the stage for the final time that night, someone grabbed her arm. She turned to find a woman she didn't recognize, middle-aged with kind eyes and tears still visible on her cheeks. "I just wanted to tell you," the woman said, her voice unsteady, "that was the most beautiful thing I've heard in years. I lost my mother last spring, and your song. It felt like she was right there with me again. Thank you so much." Before she could respond, the woman pulled her into a hug, a tight, genuine embrace from a complete stranger. When they separated, the woman wiped her eyes, smiled once more, and disappeared into the crowd. She stood there for a long moment, stunned. That woman had no idea about her grandmother, no idea about the years of doubt and loneliness and fear. But somehow, the music had communicated what words never could. It had reached across the space between two strangers and created a connection that neither of them expected. That was worth more than any trophy. Her brother was waiting outside when she finally emerged from the building. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Pride. Real, unmistakable pride. "I recorded it," he said quietly. "Your whole performance. I hope that's okay." She nodded, too exhausted to speak. "Can I post it online? I think people should see it." She hesitated. The idea of more people watching her, judging her, forming opinions about her, made her stomach tighten. But then she thought about the woman who had hugged her, about the connection that music could create, about all the people out there who might be feeling invisible and worthless, just like she had felt for so long. "Okay," she said, "post it." She didn't expect much. Maybe a few dozen views from friends and family. Maybe some polite comments from people who felt obligated to say something nice. She went to bed that night feeling peaceful for the first time in weeks, content with what she had accomplished regardless of what came next. But when she woke up the next morning and checked her phone, she found something she never could have predicted. The video had gone viral. Thousands of views, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. Comments poured in from strangers all over the world, people who had watched her freeze on stage and then find her voice, people who had been moved to tears by a song sung by a woman they had never met. "This is the most real performance I've ever seen. I've watched this 20 times and I cry every single time." She sang like she had nothing left to lose. That's what real courage looks like. "I was about to give up on my own dreams. This video changed my mind." Messages filled her inbox, interview requests, invitations to perform at other events. A local radio station wanted to feature her story. A music producer reached out to discuss recording opportunities. Her small, quiet life had been turned upside down overnight. But the messages that meant the most to her weren't from producers or radio hosts. They were from ordinary people. A teenager who said her performance inspired him to try out for his school choir. A woman who had been too scared to leave a bad relationship until she watched the video and realized she deserved better. A man who said he hadn't cried in 15 years, but her song broke something open inside him that needed to break. These were the moments that mattered. These were the reasons she had stepped onto that stage, even if she hadn't known it at the time. She did perform at the town festival eventually. Not that year, but the next. By then, she had sung at dozens of events, big and small. She had recorded a few songs and shared them online, where they found audiences she never could have imagined. She wasn't famous in any traditional sense. She didn't have millions of followers or a record deal with a major label, but she had something better. She had purpose. Every time she stepped onto a stage now, she thought about that first night, the terror, the silence, the moment she almost ran away, and she thought about her grandmother's words, the ones that had saved her when nothing else could. "The magic is waiting, child, but you have to be brave enough to find it." She had found the magic, not in the applause or the views or the messages from strangers, though all of those things were beautiful. She had found the magic inside herself, in the discovery that her voice mattered, that her story mattered, that she mattered even when the world had spent years telling her otherwise. Years later, when people asked her about that night, she always said the same thing. "I didn't walk on that stage to prove anyone wrong. I walked on that stage to prove to myself that I was worth hearing. And I was. I always had been. I just needed to be brave enough to believe it." She still kept her grandmother's photo on her nightstand. Every night before she slept and every morning when she woke, she looked at that gentle, knowing smile. "Thank you, Grandma," she would whisper, "for teaching me that fear is just a feeling, and that the magic is always waiting on the other side of brave." And somewhere she knew her grandmother was still listening, still smiling, still proud.